I'm going to go to school out there and work on my
Yeah,
master's.
she was running away, right, Papa?
What?
She didn't want anyone to know, or that she didn't want you to know where she was?
No, he just told you he went to radio school and she told him if he was gonna leave, she was gonna leave too.
She was going for our master's at Tulane. And so I went on and went to Cincinnati, and when I completed my program, I came back to Tampa. And we had been going together at that point for about 4.5 years, 5 years. So I got back to Tampa and I tried to find her, tried to connect with her in New Orleans, and I didn't know where she was staying or didn't have an address for her or anything like that. And anyone else that I asked, like Uncle Leo and Aunt June, they wouldn't give me the address.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. No, they refused to give me the address. They were told not to give me the address. That was why they refused, because she told them, she said, I don't want anyone to know where, I don't want him to know where I am. So I couldn't find her. And finally one day, I guess it was Vivian. Vivian at that time was a stewardess or hostess, whatever, on National Airlines that she used to fly out of Miami to New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And so she would see Grandma there. She would see Belle there. And one day we met, and I said, do you know where she is? And she said, well, I know where she is. She said, but I wouldn't want her to know that I told you. And I said, well, Vivian, if you tell me, I won't tell her. So anyway, she gave me the address. Now I had absolutely no money. I'd come back from Cincinnati. I was broke. I had a chance to go to work in Cincinnati, but it would be 2 weeks before I'd get paid.
Right.
So
I remember you told me that story.
You got a ride, right?
I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay because I wasn't going to have any money. So I got a ride back to Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found out that she was in New Orleans, I said, well, I'm going to have to get to New Orleans somehow. And one day I was looking through the newspaper and it said, help wanted, driver to drive to New Orleans. And there was a telephone number and all of that, so I called the guy, and he lived out in East Tampa. And he said, yes, he said, I'm driving to New Orleans, and thought perhaps you might, or I was trying to get a driver to help me, because there was there were no interstates at that time, so it took, to get from Tampa to New Orleans, it took about 13 hours.
Oh, okay.
And he didn't want to drive by himself. So we talked, and he said, well, you can come, as long as you help me to drive. You don't have to put any gas in the car, anything like that. So I accepted the challenge, and we left at about 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And we drove, 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 until we were 60 miles outside of New Orleans. And at this point, he says to me, he says, you know what? He was going out there to work in the shipyard, because they were building ships there at that time. And he said, I think I want to turn around and go back to Tampa. And I said, what? He said, yeah, he said, I'm not going to go work out there anymore. I'm going to turn around and go back to Tampa. And I said, you can't do that. He said, well, no. He said, I don't think I like it here. I said, well, you got to give it a chance. So I had to do a selling job now. I had to convince him that, yes, he would be happy in New Orleans, and if he wasn't happy after he stayed there and tried it for a while, then he would go back to Tampa. So I was finally able to convince him, and I had the address, She lived in the Garden District, what they refer to as the
Yeah,
Garden District.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Which is beautiful. And we got to the house. She lived in this 3-story house that the owner rented out to FBI people and that sort of thing.
For real?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Hmm.
So she didn't know I was coming, and went up to the door. And you remember that one time when we were in New Orleans, I took you to the house, and we went to the door and all that. Anyway, we went to the door, and I rang the bell, and all of a sudden here comes this elderly woman, beautifully dressed in a long, long gown, hair well done up, very, very gray, very thin, very autocratic or aristocratic, I should say. And hello? I said, yes, ma'am. I said, my name is Joe Russo, and I'm here to see Miss Donica. You're Joe? I said, yes, ma'am. She says, well, she said, Lou's upstairs. I'll have to go get her. She never called her. She never called her Belle.
She called her Lou?
She called her Lou. She said, Lou's upstairs. I'll have to go get her. So she went up and she got Grandma, and she came down. So now we talked. Miss Annie said, well, Joe, she said, you'll be on the 3rd floor.
No discussion though?
I was pulling.
Discussion for what?
Well, I mean, she didn't know you were coming, so I mean, she wasn't mad at you or anything?
You mean Grandma?
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, she says, Lou, she says, you'll be on the 3rd floor, Lou will be on the 2nd. She says, but there'll be no coming down. She says, you can stay here. She says, but there'll be no coming down at night.
Well, how did you pay for that?
You'll be coming down at night. Do you understand that? And I said,
Basically, you better stay on your side of the house and
she says,
let Grandma
she
stay.
said, well, she said, if you're going to do any spooning at all, there was this huge porch. She said, if you're going to do any spooning at all, you can do it on the porch. There's a swing there, and you can do that. So that was it. No, I didn't have any money. She didn't ask me for any money or anything like that. She was just, I was a friend of Lou's, and she knew that Grandma, I guess, had spoken to her about me, and that there was this fella that she had been going with for some time. So anyway, we went out, and Grandma said to me, I'm gonna take you to an oyster house. I said, an oyster house? Yeah. I said, well, I've never had oysters. I said, in New York, we have clams. I said, but I've never had oysters. So we went to the oyster house and had dinner, and Grandma paid for it. And then I proposed to her. I said, would you like to get married? And she said, why? I said, well, I want us to get married because we had been together all of this time. So we agreed that we would get married. This was in January, February, March, like April. No, we got married in September.
August 1st.
Pardon me?
August 1st.
August the 1st. And I came back to Tampa, went to work at WTVT in March, and then we got married in August the 1st.
For what year?
1953. And I went to work at $35 a week. Well, actually, not 35. When Colonel Robinson, Major Robinson, who was the general manager and whom I had met in Cincinnati, he was in the same class that I was, but he was the general manager of WSUN Radio. He was the one that brought me back to Florida
Uh-huh.
and didn't charge me. But anyway, I went to him and I said, Major, but the television station wasn't on the air yet. We were working on it.
It was only radio.
It was only radio, but we had a television license,
Mm-hmm.
and it was going to be the first ultra-high frequency station in the entire state of Florida, or actually in the eastern part of the country.
Hmm.
So with that, I said, I can't go to work for $35 a week. He says, well, I'll give you 40. I said, okay. So I went to work there at $40 a week. And then we got married in August. But ours was a very small wedding, nothing like today. It was just coffee and cake, and those were the weddings of the time in the South. You know, there was no whiskey, no drinks, nothing like that. We got married at the First Methodist Church
Yeah, in front of UT.
downtown. Right, Dr. Nance, who was the president of the university, married us, and my mother and father and the children came down. They spent several days with us here, and when we after we were married, we drove down to. She wanted to go to Cuba, and I said she wanted to fly, and I had never flown in my life. She had, and I said, no way, we're not going to do that. Well, where do you want to go? I was familiar with Miami, and I liked Miami, and I said, well, let's go to Miami. So we went to Miami, and we met Vivian. We were staying on the beach. We met Vivian one night, and then she was there for several days before she was going to have to take another flight. So we met her one time, went up and down the elevator, and then the next day we went up and down the elevator, and then the next day the elevator said to us, my goodness, have you got 2 wives? And I said,
To
why?
you?
Yeah. Why? Well, you're going up and down with those women all the time, you know. I said, no, it was just one. So that was it. I forget the name of the hotel that we stayed at. But anyway, that was it. Yeah. So that was,
You got 2 wives.
yeah.